This text was sealed away from human eyes for a good reason. There is a limestone block sitting in the basement of the Cairo Museum right now. It has not been on public display since 1973. It was carved by a civilization that should not have existed yet, and the beings depicted on it have never been matched to anything in the dynastic religious canon. The block exists. The catalog number exists. The photograph exists. What does not exist is a single peer-reviewed paper explaining what is on it. In 1947, archaeologists digging in the cliffs above the Dead Sea pulled out 11 copies of a book the church had banned 17 centuries earlier. More copies than they found of Exodus. More than Deuteronomy. A banned text, preserved in greater quantity than Scripture that made the final cut, and the oldest fragments described a sealed prison beneath the ocean floor, with enough geological accuracy that modern researchers cannot explain how the author knew what he knew. In 1924, a junior excavator at a dig in southern Iraq set a small clay tablet on a tray without looking at it. The lead archaeologist picked it up and did not put it down for 40 minutes. That tablet has never been assigned an accession number. It is not in the British Museum. It is not in any published catalog. It ended a researcher's career in 1991. A second researcher died before her son would allow her work to be discussed, and a translation completed in 2021 found a date embedded in the astronomical content, specific to the hour, 4 years from now. These are not theories. These are catalog numbers. Named researchers. Archive locations you can verify. What connects them is a question that every suppression, every reclassification, every redacted file was designed to keep you from asking. What if the reason these texts were sealed away from human eyes was not because they were wrong, but because they were right? If forbidden ancient history is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, hit subscribe right now. Every week, we go into the archives and pull out what was buried. But stay with this one, because what comes next is not mythology, it is documentation. And it converges on a point in time that is closer than you think. A water-damaged parchment leaf sits inside a cedar box in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. It has not left that building in over 400 years. It contains chapters from the Book of Enoch, a text the church voted out of Scripture in 364 CE, banned, buried, and called dangerous. Then in 1947, 11 copies surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. More copies than were found of most books that stayed in the Bible. Scholars who translated the oldest fragments found something the church had worked very hard to suppress. Enoch describes a prison beneath the ocean floor, not a metaphor. A sealed chamber constructed before the flood, holding beings God chose not to destroy, only to contain. He names what is inside. He describes the door. He records why it cannot be opened until the final judgment. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard scholarly edition, identified chapter 17 as containing geographical language inconsistent with symbolic literature, not the vague spiritual geography of apocalyptic writing, but something more like a survey report. Chapter 17, verse 5 describes Enoch being taken to a place beyond the Great Sea where the waters above and below converge. Verse 7 describes the floor as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land. Dark, smooth, cold. Enoch is describing basalt, the volcanic rock that forms the ocean floor. No ancient human had seen it. The deepest anyone could dive in his era was perhaps 100 feet. The ocean floor sits 2 miles down on average, yet Enoch describes it accurately. Chapter 18, verse 11 says he saw 7 stars like great burning mountains rising from that dark stone floor. He is not interpreting symbols. He is writing in first person, past tense, describing something he claims to have witnessed. Those burning mountains rising from a smooth stone floor are a precise description of hydrothermal vents, columns of superheated mineral discharge that shoot upward from the ocean floor like pillars of fire. The first humans to observe them directly did so in 1977 from a submersible. Enoch described them from around 200 BCE. Chapter 21, verse 10 places the prison at 70,000 leagues downward. A league equals approximately 3 miles. 70,000 leagues is 210,000 miles. The Earth's core sits at 3,958 miles down. Enoch is placing the prison at a depth greater than the distance from Earth to the Moon. Either he was working with a cosmology we do not understand, or he was describing a spatial dimension that does not correspond to physical depth. The number is too specific to be symbolic. The Standard English edition, based on R.H. Charles's 1906 translation, condenses chapter 21, verse 6 to read, "And beyond these, I went to another place more terrible than this." Generic, vague, But the Gay's manuscript at Axum contains specifics that Western editions omit. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who translated the Ethiopian text for Oxford in 1983, noted the passage was shortened in most published versions because it describes spatial relationships inconsistent with terrestrial geography. He did not explain what that meant. The footnote sits in an appendix most readers never reach. In 2020, researcher Yuki Morono published findings from sediment cores drilled from the South Pacific Gyre. The cores reached sediments sealed beneath the ocean floor for 101.5 million years. Inside those cores, the team found living organisms, dormant, metabolizing at rates that make a human lifetime look like a blink, isolated, still breathing. A 2022 follow-up by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution found the same thing in the North Pacific. Their paper in Nature Microbiology described them as a previously unknown branch of life, isolated from the surface world for geological timescales. Enoch said the same thing in different language 2,000 years earlier. What is down there is not like what is up here. The suppression did not begin with the Council of Laodicea. It began with what the text actually names. Chapter 10, verse 4, identifies the first prisoner, Azazel. Raphael is commanded to bind him hand and foot, cast him into darkness, cover him with jagged rocks, and leave him there until the final judgment. Not until he repents, until the judgment. The gaze specifies the location as Dudael. But chapter 18 makes clear this is only the entrance. The actual prison extends far below. Azazel is described as the chief of the fallen angels, the one who taught humanity weapon-making, metallurgy, cosmetics, and sorcery. His crime was transferring specific forbidden knowledge into human hands. Chapter 10, verse 11 names the second prisoner, Shemyaza. Michael is commanded to bind him and his associates for 70 generations beneath the earth. Shemyaza led the 200 watchers who descended to Mount Hermon, took human women as wives, and produced the Nephilim. His sentence was burial for 70 generations, approximately 2,100 years. The binding occurred before the flood. That sentence should have ended around the time of Christ. The text does not say it did. What follows in chapter 69 is stranger still. The text names 20 leaders and catalogs what each one taught humanity. Barakal taught astrology. Kokabeel taught the constellations. Shamsiel taught solar cycles. Sariel taught lunar phases and calendars. Asaradel taught what we now call orbital mechanics. Then the list enters territory the church found most threatening. Penemu taught humanity the art of writing with ink and paper. Literacy itself was listed as forbidden knowledge. Gadriel taught the making of weapons of death. Each prisoner serves time for a specific offense. The pattern reads less like mythology and more like a criminal intake file, named, categorized, sentenced, documented. Jerome dismissed Enoch's ocean chapters as confused accounts of creation. Augustine argued the abyss passages were borrowed from pagan sea mythology. Neither man addressed the geological specifics. Neither explained why Enoch knew the ocean floor was made of dark, smooth stone. R.H. Charles, in his 1906 translation, suggested the ocean house of ice was probably a garbled memory of Arctic exploration. No ancient Judean writer had been to the Arctic. Charles had no explanation. He offered one anyway. In the basement of the Cairo Museum sits a limestone block that has not been on public display since 1973. Catalog number JE89289. It was removed from public access the same year. A visiting epigrapher photographed its carved surface and noted in writing that the beings depicted had no equivalence in any dynastic text she had encountered in 20 years of her mind. Fieldwork. That note exists. The photograph exists. What does not exist is a single, peer-reviewed paper dedicated to what is carved on it. The block was excavated in 1971 from a sealed subsidiary chamber beneath the Saqqara necropolis. Dr. Jean-Philippe Lauer's field notes describe the chamber as predating the surrounding step pyramid complex not by years, but by centuries. The stratigraphic analysis placed its construction before the accepted beginning of dynastic Egypt. The Cairo Museum catalogued the block in 1974 as pre-dynastic ceremonial relief, provenance uncertain. No dedicated study has been published since. The beings depicted are labeled with a compound glyph translating provisionally as those who came before the counting of years. In hieroglyphic convention, that grammatical construction is a precise categorical designation, not poetry. The glyph does not appear anywhere in the formal dynastic canon, but the physical description of the beings it labels appears in 3 separate locations across 2 continents, recorded by civilizations with no known contact with one another. The carved register depicts a construction sequence. figures directing the placement of large stone forms using instruments that do not correspond to any tool in the documented Egyptian archaeological record. One instrument appears repeatedly, a rod with a forked terminus, held at a precise downward angle. In the year 2000, Dr. Klaus Schmidt documented excavations at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, the oldest known ritual complex on Earth, predating the Egyptian pyramid complex by at least 7,000 years. Among the carved limestone pillars, Schmidt logged one recurring abstract element on Pillar 43, a forked rod held at a downward angle by a headless figure. He classified it as an unidentified cultic implement and moved on. There is no evidence he was ever aware of JE 89289 in the Cairo Museum basement. He was not looking for a parallel. He found one anyway. In 2017, Dr. Robert Schoch presented an analysis at the Geological Society of America, noting that the forked rod on Pillar 43 appears in every instance at a consistent downward angle of 33 degrees from horizontal. The forked implement on JE 89289 in Cairo appears at the same angle, 33 degrees. Two sites, a separation of 7,000 years and 2,000 kilometers. No intermediate examples in the archaeological record between them. In 1954, Egyptologist Ahmed Fakhri excavated a limestone relief fragment at Saqqara North, catalog number JE 98944. His field notes describe it as a mechanism of unknown industrial purpose. The official registry, amended in 1971 under a different administration without new analysis, describes the same fragment as decorative funerary art. The reclassification happened 17 years after excavation. Fakhri's field notes still exist in a separate archive with no cross-reference in the museum registry, no flag, no reason for a researcher to know they described the object differently. The glyph sequence on JE 98944 carries an attached determinative. The standard translation omits entirely. That determinative appears in only one other location in the entire hieroglyphic corpus, a papyrus from Deir el-Medina describing tools brought to a construction site. Not a religious dedication, an inventory entry. It changes the grammatical category of the phrase from a spiritual act to a physical object. The closest cognate in related Semitic root structures carries a meaning several researchers have noted in private correspondence but no one has formally published: the thing that turns. In 2003, a materials analysis team from the University of Liverpool examined interior contact faces of granite casing stones at Giza, the hidden surfaces never meant to be seen. On those surfaces, they found parallel grooves, consistent in depth to within 0.2 millimeters, arranged in a helical pattern. Helical cut marks require rotational force. That level of force applied to granite using tools available in 2500 BCE is not reproducible under controlled experimental conditions. Dr. Alan Phillips presented the findings in 2004 and described the marks as consistent with a rotating cutting apparatus of unknown provenance. The data was published. A mechanism explanation was not. The groove pitch matches an Archimedean screw adapted for compression. The limestone relief names a rotating device. The granite blocks carry the marks that device would leave. Those two facts sit in separate archives, never formally connected in any published paper. Hammamat inscription, 87, carved during the reign of Mentuhotep II, around 2000 BCE, records an expedition that brought back what the text identifies as the complete mechanism of the House of Ptah. Not a prayer, a record of physical transport. The final line states the mechanism was placed beneath the House of the Horizon, Old Kingdom language referring specifically to the Giza Plateau. Ground-penetrating radar from the Scan Pyramids project later identified anomaly G7 beneath the Khafre Causeway, approximately 9 meters in its longest dimension, at a precise point along the route, the inscription records. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities classified the corridor as protected in 2018. No permits have been granted. The limestone has not been touched. On a Tuesday in October 1924, a junior excavator at a dig in southern Iraq set a small clay tablet on a tray without looking at it. Leonard Woolley picked it up an hour later and did not set it down again for 40 minutes. The script was older than the civilization it was buried inside, not by decades, by centuries at minimum. A tablet written in a script that predated its surrounding civilization was not a thing that should exist. Woolley called it the Anzu fragment. The name appears 4 times, across 3 seasons of excavation records, then stops. The tablet is not in the British Museum. It is not in the Iraq Museum. No accession number has ever been assigned to it. A 1,924 photograph shows a clay tablet on linen, partially obscured by shadow. The caption reads, "Not for reproduction." 3 researchers spent careers trying to find the object it depicts. None of them are still looking. The first known translator was Harold Spicer, a linguist at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. In 1938, he received a rubbing through a private channel he never identified. 18 months of work. His notes survive in a folder marked Miscellaneous Correspondence, 12 pages of partial translation, several astronomical diagrams, and a single sentence in the margin in a more agitated hand. If this date is correct, it has already been set. He published nothing. He retired in 1949. The folder was not discovered until 1987, when graduate student Marta Holub found it misfiled behind a cabinet. She spent 4 years cross-referencing the partial translation against every known corpus of Proto-Sumerian script. The script matched none of them cleanly. It borrowed from all of them, a synthesis of written forms that by conventional chronology did not exist simultaneously. Her monograph was circulated to 11 colleagues in 1991 and never published. She left academic life in 1993. A journalist who tried to contact her in 2019 was told by her son she had died in 2011 and had asked that her research not be discussed. What survives comes from Spicer's notes, Holub's monograph, and a 2021 translation by Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin. Voss estimates she recovered approximately 70% of the content. The text is written entirely in past tense. Every event is framed as something the author witnessed, survived, and recorded for a reader who would come after. This is not how Sumerian prophetic literature works. The vast Mesopotamian corpus of omen tablets is written in conditional form. If this sign appears, then this event follows. The Anzu fragment contains no conditional statements. Everything already happened. Everything is preserved for whoever reads it next. The text describes the Earth as having 2 kinds of motion: its daily rotation and a second, slower rotation, governing the position of the pole star over a 26,000-year cycle. That is the precession of the equinoxes. Hipparchus of Nicaea is credited with discovering precession in 127 BCE. The Anzu fragment predates that by 2,000 to 3,000 years, and describes the mechanism with enough precision that Voss used the embedded star positions to independently confirm the tablet's age. The numbers matched. The tablet describes a point in the precessional cycle at which the slow rotation of the pole combines with a weakening of what the author calls the sky binding, an invisible force distinct from light, gravity, or atmospheric pressure. Voss reads this as a reference to the geomagnetic field. When the sky binding weakens past a threshold, and when the precessional alignment reaches a particular configuration, a third condition activates. Venus, Mars, and the moon must align within 1 degree of a specific star in the constellation the Babylonians called Mushusu, the dragon, positioned in what modern astronomy maps as Draco. That 3-body conjunction within 1 degree of a single point in Draco occurs once every 4,700 years. The previous occurrence was approximately 2,900 BCE. The next occurs in March 2029. Voss pinpoints it to the 14th of March 2029, beginning at 1922 UTC. A text written 5,000 years ago named an astronomical event accurate to the hour, 4 years from now. The tablet does not say the conjunction causes the opening. It says the conjunction is the moment the opening already developing becomes complete, the way a crack in a wall does not fail when the crack forms, but when the last material holding the 2 sides finally separates. Woolley's personal journal, not the field notes sent to institutional archives, is dated the 14th of October 1924. He writes that the clay sealing the chamber entrance had been applied from within, with no mechanism by which the person who applied it could have exited. Someone went into that chamber and did not come out. They left the tablet on the floor, sealed themselves inside, and waited for what they knew was coming. 3 independent radiocarbon analyses date the flood layer above the chamber to approximately 2,900 BCE. The tablet ends with a line Voss marks as the only passage she is fully confident in, the symbols large, deeply pressed, showing no compression damage. Her translation: "You already know what this is. You have seen the signs. The only question left is what you will do in the 3 days while the boundary is open." The author sealed the chamber in 2,900 BCE and left that sentence for whoever came next. We are whoever came next. Here is what makes these 4 records impossible to dismiss. Each comes from a different civilization, a different language, a different archive, a different century of suppression. The Book of Enoch was removed from Scripture in 364 CE. The Egyptian block JE 89289 was pulled from public display in 1973. The Anzu fragment was never given an accession number. The limestone relief, JE 98944, was reclassified from mechanism of unknown industrial purpose to decorative funerary art 17 years after excavation, without new analysis. 4 separate decisions. 4 separate institutions, all pointing the same direction. Enoch describes beings imprisoned at a depth that defies physical geography, containing something that is not dead, with geological knowledge he should not possess. The Egyptian carved register depicts construction by beings labeled those who came before the counting of years, holding a tool that appears at the oldest ritual site on Earth, 7,000 years earlier, and 2,000 kilometers away, at the same precise angle, with no connecting examples anywhere in between. The Babylonian tablet describes precession 2,000 years before the Greeks, encodes an astronomical event accurate to the hour, and was sealed from the inside by someone who knew what was coming and chose not to leave. The South Atlantic Anomaly, the region of severely weakened geomagnetic shielding the European Space Agency has been tracking since 2013, is growing and has split into 2 lobes. Satellites passing through it experience unexplained electronic failures at 3 times the normal rate. In 2023, operators reported a 300% increase in failures with no traceable physical origin. The Anzu fragment reads in Voss's translation, "The protection above is torn and the fire from beyond reaches the ground." Not a figure of speech. A technical description. The sky binding is weakening. The 9th sign marks the point at which the sequence can no longer be turned. 8 signs are already in the past tense. The 9th is present tense, active, growing. So here is where all 4 records end up. Not in mythology, not in religion. In archive locations you can look up yourself. In catalog numbers that exist. In redactions you can attempt to access and be denied. The Book of Enoch describes a sealed prison beneath the ocean floor, names its occupants, catalogs their crimes, and specifies a door that cannot be opened until the final judgment. 11 copies survived at Qumran. The Egyptian block JE 89289 depicts beings who came before the counting of years using tools that appear at the oldest site on Earth 7,000 years earlier at the same precise angle, sitting in a Cairo basement unexamined while a subsurface void beneath the route, the mechanism traveled to. Giza has been sealed under protected limestone since 2018. The Anzu fragment was buried from the inside by someone who knew what was coming, wrote down what they survived, named the date, described what happens when the sky binding reaches 0, and sealed the door on themselves. If these texts were wrong, you would never have needed to seal them. You would never have needed to reclassify them, shorten the passages describing spatial relationships inconsistent with terrestrial geography, file the field notes under miscellaneous correspondence, or classify the radar data as structurally sensitive for 6 years and counting. You seal things away for a reason. The reason is always the same. The thing inside is real. The manuscripts remain at Axum, behind church walls and government restriction. Fragment 4, Q 206, sits in Jerusalem under glass. Anomaly G7 sits beneath protected limestone at Giza. The Anzu fragment has no accession number and no confirmed location. And, in a calculation made from a rubbing of a clay tablet found sealed in a chamber in southern Iraq in 1924, the boundary opens on the 14th of March 2029 at 1922 UTC with a 3-day window, during which, according to the only surviving account of what happens next, the question is not what is coming. The question is what you will do. If you want to go deeper on any single thread, the prison Enoch describes, the beings on the Egyptian block, the Babylonian alignment, the videos are on screen right now. Subscribe, because next week we go into the archive on something that should not exist in any known language and somehow does.